I stared at the text message on my phone, my hands trembling so violently, I nearly dropped it. Mom had just sent me a photo of her brand new luxury cruise tickets to the Caribbean, thanking me for being such a generous daughter. The cruise cost $12,000. I had $73 in my checking account and hadn't eaten anything but ramen noodles for 2 weeks. I had just been denied a small loan to fix my car's transmission because my credit score had tanked after I maxed out my cards, helping her with what she called emergencies. This wasn't an emergency. This was the final straw that shattered everything I thought I knew about family, love, and my own worth. If you're watching this story unfold and can relate to feeling used by the people who are supposed to love you most, please hit that like button and subscribe. Your support means everything, and I'd love to hear your own experiences in the comments below. Now let me take you back to where this all began. Because the path to that devastating text message started long before I ever realized I was drowning. I grew up in a modest suburban home in Dayton, Ohio, in a neighborhood where everyone knew everyone else's business. Our house was the split-level ranch with the blue shutters that Mom never let Dad repaint, even though he wanted something more modern. From my earliest memories, I understood that our family had an image to maintain. Mom was president of the PTA, organized the neighborhood block parties, and volunteered at the local church every Sunday. To everyone outside our four walls, we were the perfect family. Inside, the reality was far more complicated. I was the youngest of 3 children and the only daughter. My brothers, Tyler and Jason, I were born just 18 months apart and seemed to operate as a single unit for most of my childhood. They had their own language of inside jokes, their own activities, their own world that didn't include me. Tyler was the natural athlete, the kind of kid who could pick up any sport and excel within weeks. Jason was the academic prodigy who read college-level textbooks for fun and competed in national science fairs. Then there was me, born 5 years after Jason. Unplanned and unexpected, I wasn't particularly athletic or academic. I was just there, filling a role that nobody seemed to have defined. Mom had a way of talking about my birth that always made me feel like an interruption. She would tell the story at family gatherings, laughing about how she thought she was done having babies, how she had just gotten back into her pre-pregnancy clothes from Jason, how she had finally started feeling like herself again. Then surprise, there I was, ruining her plans for going back to work full-time as a real estate agent. She never said it in a mean way, always with a smile and a laugh. But the message was clear. I was the unexpected burden, the complication, the reason she had to put her dreams on hold. Dad was different. He was a quiet man who worked as an accountant for a mid-sized manufacturing company. He left early in the morning and came home late in the evening, often looking exhausted. But when he was home, he was present. He would help me with homework, teach me card games, take me for ice cream on Saturday afternoons while Mom was busy with the boys' activities. I was his little sidekick. And those moments with him were the only times I felt like I truly mattered to someone in my family. When I was 12 years old, Dad had a massive heart attack while working late at the office. He was only 47. The funeral was a blur of black clothes, casseroles from neighbors, and Mom's dramatic sobbing. I remember watching her performance, because that's what it felt like even then, and feeling guilty for thinking such a horrible thing about my own mother at my father's funeral. But I couldn't shake the feeling that her grief was somehow performative, played up for the audience of mourners rather than genuine sorrow. The life insurance payout was substantial, nearly $400,000. Dad had been responsible that way, always planning for the worst-case scenario. Mom assured us that she would invest it wisely, that it would secure our futures, that we would never have to worry. Within 6 months, she had renovated the kitchen with custom cabinets and granite countertops. Within a year, she had taken 3 vacations, including a month-long trip to Europe with her sister. Within 18 months, she had traded in her sensible sedan for a luxury SUV. By the time I turned 15, the money was gone, and Mom was complaining about how hard it was to make ends meet on her modest real estate commissions. But it was during those years right after Dad's death that my role in the family truly solidified. At 12, I became the emotional support for Mom. She would come into my room late at night, crying about how lonely she was, how hard it was to be a single mother, how worried she was about money, despite spending it faster than water through a sieve. I would hold her hand and tell her everything would be okay. I would make her tea and listen to her rant about her day. I became her confidant, her therapist, her emotional dumping ground. Tyler and Jason, on the other hand, seemed to get a pass. They were grieving too, Mom said, and boys didn't process emotions the same way. They needed space, needed to focus on their activities and their futures. Tyler's travel baseball team became more expensive, with tournaments in different states requiring hotel rooms and meals. Jason's academic competitions needed funding for registration fees and travel. Mom found the money for all of it. Somehow, while telling me we needed to cut back on groceries and that maybe I didn't really need new school clothes that year. When I turned 16 and got my first job at a local coffee shop called The Daily Grind, I was excited about the independence it represented. I imagined saving up for a car, maybe going on a senior trip with friends, having spending money for movies and concerts. That dream lasted exactly 2 weeks. Mom sat me down at the kitchen table with a serious expression and a spreadsheet. She showed me the household budget, pointing out all the expenses and the gap between what was coming in and what was going out. She explained that now that I was earning money, it was time I contributed to the household like a responsible member of the family. She didn't ask for much at first, just $50 a week for groceries. I felt proud, actually, to be helping. It made me feel grown up, mature, needed in a way I had never felt before. I didn't think to ask why Tyler, who was 19 and working as a lifeguard, making decent money, wasn't being asked to contribute. I didn't think to question why Jason, who was 17 and had a well-paying job as a math tutor, wasn't on the spreadsheet at all. I was just happy to finally have a defined role in the family beyond emotional support puppet. The $50 a week quickly became $75, then $100. Mom's real estate business was struggling. She said, the market was tough. She had a few bad months. I worked extra shifts, picked up weekend hours, missed school activities to make sure I could cover my contribution. My grades started to slip because I was too tired to focus. My friends stopped inviting me places because I was always working. But I told myself this was temporary, that Mom just needed help getting back on her feet, that this was what family did for each other. Junior year of high school, my English teacher, Mrs. Patterson, pulled me aside after class. She had noticed my decline in performance and wanted to know if everything was okay at home. For a moment, I considered telling her the truth. I considered explaining how exhausted I was, how I was working 30 hours a week while trying to maintain my schoolwork, how I fell asleep in class sometimes because I had worked until midnight the night before. But then I thought about what people would say about Mom, about our family. I thought about how disappointed Dad would be if I aired our private struggles. So I smiled and told Mrs. Patterson I was fine, just a little stressed about college applications. College. That was the dream that kept me going through those difficult years. I imagined going away to school, living in a dorm, meeting new people who didn't know me as the quiet girl, who was always working, or the daughter of the dramatic widow. I researched universities obsessively, read every college guide I could get my hands from the library. I brought my grades back up through sheer determination, staying up late after work to complete assignments, studying during my breaks at the coffee shop. I fell in love with Ohio State University during a campus tour my senior year. It was big enough to get lost in, but close enough that I could come home if needed. I could see myself walking those tree-lined paths, sitting in those large lecture halls, being someone new. I worked incredibly hard that final year, brought my GPA up to a respectable level, and wrote what I thought were compelling college essays about overcoming adversity and learning resilience after losing my father. The acceptance letter came in the spring, along with a partial academic scholarship that would cover about 60% of tuition. I was ecstatic. I ran downstairs waving the letter, ready to celebrate with Mom. She was sitting at the kitchen table paying bills, and she looked up at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. I thrust the letter toward her, breathless with excitement. She read it slowly, her lips pressed into a thin line. "Congratulations," she said flatly. Then she asked how I planned to pay for the remaining 40% plus room and board. I explained that I had been saving from my job, that I could take out student loans, that I would continue working part-time. She shook her head slowly, and that's when she told me she couldn't afford to help me at all. In fact, she needed me to stay home and help with expenses. Tyler was in his junior year at a private college upstate that cost $40,000 a year, and she was struggling to make the payments. Jason had just been accepted to medical school, which would require massive financial support over the next several years. I felt something crack inside my chest. I asked, as calmly as I could manage, why Tyler couldn't transfer to a cheaper school if money was so tight. Why Jason couldn't take out loans like millions of other medical students. Mom looked at me like I had suggested something absurd. Tyler needed to finish his degree at that school because of his baseball connections, she explained. Jason's medical school acceptance was too prestigious to pass up, and she wasn't going to let her son start his career buried in debt when there were other options. Other options, meaning me. I was the other option. I was the solution to the family's financial problems because my dreams were less important, my future less prestigious, my needs less urgent. I remember sitting down heavily in the chair across from her, the acceptance letter suddenly feeling like just a piece of paper, meaningless in the face of family obligation. Mom reached across the table and took my hand. She told me how proud she was of me, how mature and responsible I had become, how she knew I would make the right decision. She told me that college would always be there, that I could go in a year or two, once things stabilized. She told me that family came first. Always, I deferred my enrollment for a year. I got a full-time job as a receptionist at a dental office, where I answered phones, scheduled appointments, and filed insurance claims for 8 hours a day. I told myself it was just temporary, just 1 year to help the family through a rough patch. I told myself that next year I would go to Ohio State and start my real life. I held on to that belief like a lifeline. Worked hard. Saved every penny I could, beyond my contribution to Mom's household expenses. That summer, Tyler brought home his girlfriend, Amanda, a cheerful sorority girl who seemed nice enough. They had been dating for about 6 months, and he wanted us to meet her. The dinner Mom prepared was elaborate, the kind of meal she used to make when Dad was alive and we had something to celebrate. She had bought expensive steaks, made Tyler's favorite sides, even baked a chocolate cake from scratch. I remember thinking how strange it was that she claimed we couldn't afford to help me with college but could afford this lavish meal. After dinner, Tyler announced that he and Amanda were getting serious, that he could see a future with her. Mom practically glowed with joy. She started talking about weddings and grandchildren, about how wonderful it would be to have a daughter-in-law. I felt invisible at that table, eating the dinner I had helped pay for, watching my brother's future unfold in real time while mine remained perpetually on hold. The year I had promised to defer turned into 2 years, then 3. Every time I saved enough money to think about going back to my college plans, something would happen. Mom's car would break down and need expensive repairs. The water heater would die and need replacing. Tyler would need help with rent, because his part-time job wasn't covering his expenses in addition to his full social life. Jason would need money for MCAT prep courses or medical school application fees. Each time, Mom would sit me down with her concerned expression and explain the emergency. And each time, I would hand over my savings because what choice did I have? How could I say no when my family needed me? I stopped talking about college altogether. My friends from high school had all moved on, posting pictures from their various universities, talking about classes and parties and newfound independence. I unfollowed most of them on social media because seeing their lives was too painful. I felt like I was stuck in amber, frozen at 18 while the world moved forward without me. The dental office became my entire world. My boss, Dr. Chen, was a kind woman who had immigrated from Taiwan as a young adult and built her practice from nothing. She saw something in me that I didn't see in myself. She started giving me more responsibilities, teaching me about practice management, having me handle more complex administrative tasks. She paid me fairly and gave me raises without my having to ask. She treated me with respect, which was so different from how I felt at home that sometimes it brought tears to my eyes. When I turned 22, Dr. Chen sat me down and told me I was wasting my potential. She said I was smart, capable, and dedicated, and that I should be doing more with my life than answering phones. She asked me why I had never gone to college. I gave her the practiced answer I had given everyone else, about how the timing hadn't been right, how I needed to work, how college wasn't for everyone. She looked at me with such understanding that I almost broke down right there in her office. She told me that it was never too late, that she herself had gone back to school in her 30s. Then she offered to help me with tuition if I wanted to start taking classes part-time. I was stunned. No one had ever offered to invest in me like that. I thanked her profusely but told her I couldn't accept such a generous offer. The truth was, I was terrified of what Mom would say if I started putting my own goals ahead of the family's needs again. I had been so thoroughly trained to believe that my role was to support everyone else that the idea of accepting help for myself felt selfish. Wrong. Almost immoral. But Dr. Chen planted a seed that day. I started researching online degree programs, looking at schools that would let me study while continuing to work full-time. I calculated budgets. I figured out how much I could afford if I cut back on my contributions to Mom's household. I dreamed again, quietly and secretly, about having something that belonged to just me. Then I met David. It was at a dental conference that Dr. Chen had asked me to attend with her. I was manning the registration table when he walked up, tall and confident, with an easy smile and warm brown eyes. He was a pharmaceutical sales representative, well-dressed and articulate, clearly successful. We chatted while I checked him in, and he asked if I was a dentist. I laughed and explained I was just the office manager. He said that just seemed wrong. That office managers were the backbone of any medical practice. It was such a simple comment, but it meant the world to me. Someone saw the value in what I did. He asked me to dinner that night. I almost said no. Almost told him I couldn't because I wasn't interesting enough. Successful enough? Good enough for someone like him. But something made me say yes. Maybe it was being away from home. Away from the weight of my family's expectations. Maybe it was the way he looked at me, like I was someone worth knowing. Whatever it was, I said yes. And that dinner changed my life. David was 31, 4 years older than me, and had his life together in ways I couldn't imagine. He owned a condo, had a solid career with room for advancement, traveled regularly for work. He talked about his goals and dreams with such confidence, such certainty that he would achieve them. I felt like a child next to him, like I had nothing to offer. But he kept calling, kept asking me out, kept showing interest in me as a person. Our third date, he asked me about my dreams. Not what I did for work or where I went to school, but what I actually wanted from life. I realized I didn't know how to answer. I had spent so many years focused on what everyone else needed that I had lost touch with what I wanted. I told him that honestly, and instead of being put off, he seemed intrigued. He said he wanted to help me figure it out, that everyone deserved to have dreams. We dated for 6 months before he asked me to move in with him. I was terrified to tell Mom. I knew she would see it as abandonment, as me choosing a man over my family. I rehearsed the conversation 100 times in my head, trying to find the right words to explain that I needed to build my own life without making her feel rejected. When I finally sat her down to tell her, her reaction was worse than I had imagined. She cried, which I had expected. But then she got angry in a way I had rarely seen. She asked me if I had any idea how selfish I was being. She reminded me of everything she had sacrificed for me, everything she had done to raise me. After Dad died, she told me she had been counting on my help, that she had bills she couldn't pay without my contribution. She said I was abandoning her in her time of need, just like everyone else in her life had abandoned her. She brought up Dad's death, implied that he would be disappointed in me for being so ungrateful. I tried to stay calm, tried to explain that I would still help when I could, that I just needed some space to grow and build my own future. She wasn't hearing it. She told me that if I moved out, I was choosing David over family, and I would have to live with that choice. She said not to expect her to be there for me when things inevitably fell apart, because men like David didn't stick around for girls like me. I left that conversation feeling like the worst person in the world, but I also felt a spark of anger that I had never allowed myself to feel before. How dare she make me feel guilty for wanting a life of my own? I moved in with David the following month. The first night in his condo, I cried for hours. Not because I was sad, but because I was overwhelmed by the strangeness of it all. I could eat when I wanted, sleep when I wanted, watch what I wanted on television. I didn't have to ask permission or check if someone needed something. The freedom was disorienting, almost frightening. David held me and let me cry. Didn't try to fix it or tell me I was being silly. He just let me feel what I was feeling. Mom didn't speak to me for 3 weeks. Then she called, her voice cold and distant, to inform me that she had been hospitalized for chest pains. The doctors thought it might be stress-related. Stress from being abandoned by her ungrateful daughter. I felt the familiar guilt crash over me like a wave. I went to the hospital immediately. Found her in a private room looking surprisingly well for someone who had supposedly been having chest pains. She milked my visit for all it was worth, talking about how hard it had been, how alone she felt, how worried she was about her health. Before I left, she asked if I could help with the hospital bill. Her insurance didn't cover everything, she said. I wrote her a check for $500. Money I had been saving for textbooks because David had convinced me to enroll in online classes. I told myself it was an emergency, that this was different from the constant requests I had dealt with before. But as I drove home, I couldn't shake the feeling that I had been manipulated. David saw through it immediately. When I told him what happened, he didn't say "I told you so," but his expression was skeptical. He asked me gently if I had noticed that this health scare happened right after I moved out. He asked if the doctors had actually found anything wrong or if it was just anxiety and stress. He asked how many times my brothers had been called to help with the hospital bill. I didn't have good answers to any of his questions. That night marked the beginning of a new kind of education for me. David started pointing out patterns I had been too close to see. He showed me how Mom's emergencies always seemed to coincide with moments when I was focusing on myself. He helped me see the difference between genuine crises and manufactured drama, designed to pull me back into my role as caretaker and cash machine. He encouraged me to go back to school. Even offered to help with tuition since I had given my textbook money to Mom. I enrolled in an online business administration program through a state university. The coursework was challenging but exhilarating. I was learning about management theory, organizational behavior, marketing strategies. I was using my brain in ways I hadn't since high school. I would stay up late after work, completing assignments and reading textbooks, feeling like I was finally becoming the person I was meant to be. Mom called regularly, but I had David's support in setting boundaries. I reduced my financial contributions to $200 a month, which David said was still too much considering I was paying my own way through school. But it felt like a reasonable compromise to me. I stopped being available for every small crisis. I started saying no to requests that felt manipulative or unnecessary. It was hard, and I felt guilty constantly. But I also felt lighter and freer, more like myself than I ever had. Then Tyler got engaged to Amanda, and the family dynamics shifted in unexpected ways. The engagement party was elaborate, held at an expensive restaurant that Mom somehow found the money to rent out. I attended with David, who charmed everyone he met. Tyler seemed genuinely happy, and I was glad for him. But then Mom started talking about the wedding plans, about how much everything would cost, about how she wanted to make sure Tyler had the perfect day since he was her firstborn son. I should have seen it coming, but I was still shocked when she called a week later asking if I could help with wedding expenses. Tyler and Amanda's families were supposed to split costs, she explained. But Tyler's family was us, and us meant Mom since Dad was gone. She couldn't afford her half on her own. Would I be willing to chip in? She wasn't asking for much, maybe $3,000 or $4,000 to help cover her portion. It was for Tyler, my own brother. Surely I wanted him to have a nice wedding. I told her no. The word felt foreign in my mouth, wrong and sharp. She was quiet for a long moment, then asked me to think about it, to not make any rash decisions. I told her I had thought about it, that I was paying for my own education and building my own life, and that Tyler's wedding was not my financial responsibility. She hung up on me. Tyler called next, clearly coached by Mom. He didn't come right out and ask for money, but he talked about how important family was, about how he had always been there for me growing up. I wanted to laugh at that statement. When had Tyler ever been there for me? When had he noticed that I was working myself into exhaustion while he enjoyed his college experience? When had he asked if I was okay or if I needed anything? But I didn't say any of that. I congratulated him on his engagement and wished him well, then ended the call. Jason, surprisingly, didn't call. He sent a long email instead, more thoughtful and measured than Tyler's approach. He acknowledged that the family dynamics had been unbalanced, that I had shouldered more than my fair share of responsibility over the years. He said he was starting to realize that in his residency program, seeing families and how they functioned, seeing what healthy relationships looked like. He apologized for not seeing it sooner. He didn't ask me for money. He just wanted me to know that he saw me now, that he recognized what I had done and what I had given up. I cried reading that email, grateful for at least one person in my family willing to acknowledge the truth. Mom didn't speak to me for 2 months after I refused to help with Tyler's wedding. I used that time to focus on school and my relationship with David. He proposed on a random Tuesday night. Nothing fancy or elaborate. We were making dinner together in his kitchen, and he just turned to me and asked if I wanted to spend the rest of my life with him. I said yes before he even finished the sentence. We were engaged for 6 months before we told anyone, just enjoying the secret happiness between us. When I finally told Mom, her reaction was muted. She asked about the ring, about when we were planning the wedding, about how many guests we would invite. She didn't say congratulations. She didn't say she was happy for me. She just gathered information, her mind clearly working on calculations I couldn't yet see. Then she asked, almost as an afterthought, if I had thought about contributing to Tyler's wedding now that I was getting married myself and would understand the costs involved. I told her again that Tyler's wedding was not my financial responsibility. She sighed, that long-suffering sigh I knew so well, and said she had hoped I would have grown out of my selfish phase by now. Then she hung up. I blocked her number for a week just to have some peace. David and I planned a small, intimate wedding at a local garden venue. We invited 50 people, mostly David's family and our friends. I invited Mom and my brothers, but I didn't ask Mom for input on any decisions. I didn't share details about my dress, my flowers, my menu. I kept her at arm's length, protecting my joy from her tendency to either take over or tear down. It felt strange, planning this major life event without my mother's involvement, but it also felt necessary. The night before my wedding, Mom called from a number I didn't recognize. She was crying, saying she couldn't believe I was getting married without really including her, that she was my mother and deserved to be part of this important milestone. Part of me wanted to give in, to invite her into the planning and make peace. But I remembered all the times she had made things about her, all the times she had stolen my joy and made it her drama. I told her gently but firmly that I loved her, but that this wedding was about David and me, and I needed her to respect that. She showed up at the wedding wearing black, which several guests commented on, and she left before the reception even started, claiming a migraine. Married life with David was everything I had hoped it would be, and more. He was supportive of my education, proud of my accomplishments, encouraging when I doubted myself. He got a major promotion 6 months after our wedding, which came with a significant salary increase. He suggested I cut back my hours at the dental office so I could focus more on school. Dr. Chen was understanding, reducing me to part-time, but keeping me on at the same hourly rate. I was able to take more classes per semester, moving toward my degree faster than I had thought possible. I graduated at 28 with honors, 3 years later than my original plan, but still a massive achievement. David threw me a surprise party, inviting Dr. Chen and my coworkers, his family, our friends. Mom didn't come. She had sent a text saying she wasn't feeling well, but I knew the real reason. My success was too painful for her to witness because it represented my independence from her, my refusal to remain in the role she had assigned me. With my degree complete, I applied for marketing positions at several companies. I got 3 offers and chose a position at a growing tech startup with incredible potential for advancement. The salary was more than I had ever made, and the work was challenging and creative. I thrived in the environment, quickly proving myself valuable to the team. Within a year, I was promoted to senior marketing coordinator. Within 2 years, I was the marketing manager with a team of 5 people reporting to me. David and I bought a house. Nothing extravagant but ours. We had a small mortgage, manageable bills, and for the first time in my life, I had savings that I didn't feel compelled to give away. We talked about starting a family, about the life we wanted to build. Everything felt like it was falling into place. I maintained minimal contact with Mom during those years. I still sent the $200 a month. Though David argued I should stop, I saw her on major holidays, always at a restaurant or public place rather than inviting her to our home. I brought thoughtful gifts and stayed for a polite amount of time, then left before things could go sideways. It was cordial but distant, the relationship more out of obligation than genuine connection. Tyler's marriage seemed happy enough from the outside. He and Amanda had a daughter, Sophia, who was absolutely adorable. I was glad to be an aunt. Sent gifts on birthdays and holidays, though I rarely saw them since they lived 3 hours away. Jason had finished his residency and was working as a physician at a hospital in Cleveland. He had married a fellow doctor named Priya, and they seemed well matched and content. My brothers had built their lives, and I had built mine, and we existed in separate orbits held together by the thin thread of shared DNA and childhood memories. Then David and I started actively trying for a baby. I was 30. He was 34, and we both felt ready for the next chapter. I had visions of myself as a mother, kind of doing things differently than they had been done for me, of raising a child who knew they were valued for who they were rather than what they could provide. We tried for 6 months with no success. My doctor suggested we see a fertility specialist to rule out any issues. The fertility clinic was in a professional building downtown. All soft lighting and comfortable chairs and magazines about parenting scattered on every surface. The doctor was efficient and kind, running a battery of tests on both David and me. Most were covered by insurance, but there were a few specialized tests she recommended that would cost about $3,000 out of pocket. She said they weren't absolutely necessary but would give us a much clearer picture of what we were working with. David and I discussed it and decided to use our emergency savings. This was important. This was our future. We had the money set aside. And this seemed like exactly the kind of situation emergency funds were meant for. I called to schedule the tests. Feeling hopeful and nervous in equal measure, I mentioned it to Mom during one of our monthly phone calls, explaining casually why I couldn't send the $200 that month, or probably for the next few months. I wasn't asking for sympathy or support, just giving her a heads up about the temporary change. She was quiet for a long moment, and I braced myself for criticism or judgment. Instead, she surprised me. She said she understood. She said she hoped everything worked out and that she would be praying for us. She said she remembered how much she had wanted children, how blessed she felt to have had 3, even if things had been hard after Dad died. It was the most supportive thing she had said to me in years, maybe ever. I felt a small flutter of hope that maybe we were finally turning a corner. That maybe she was beginning to see me as an adult with my own life, rather than just an extension of her needs. 2 weeks later, I was at work when my phone rang. It was Tyler, his voice tight with stress. Mom had collapsed at home that morning. He had stopped by to drop off some paperwork she needed and had found her unconscious on the kitchen floor. She was at the hospital now, in the emergency room. They were running tests but suspected it had something to do with her heart. Could I come right away? I left work immediately, my own concerns about fertility forgotten in the face of this new crisis. I drove to the hospital in a daze. Images of Dad's sudden death playing through my mind. What if I lost her too? What if I never got the chance to have a real relationship with her? What if my last conversation with her had been about money? The hospital waiting room was sterile and cold, filled with anxious people pretending to read magazines or watch the muted television. Tyler was already there, pacing near the window. He looked exhausted and scared, and I felt a rush of sympathy for him despite our complicated history. He was an only son dealing with a sick mother, and that couldn't be easy regardless of our family dynamics. Jason arrived an hour later, still in his scrubs from the hospital where he worked. He immediately went to talk to Mom's doctors, using his medical knowledge and professional courtesy to get more information than Tyler and I could access. When he came back to the waiting room, his face was serious but not panicked. Mom was stable, he reported. She had experienced what was likely a severe anxiety attack combined with low blood pressure from not eating properly. She would need to stay overnight for observation. But they didn't think it was cardiac related. I felt relief wash over me, followed quickly by a creeping suspicion that I immediately felt guilty for having. Why had she not been eating properly? Why was her anxiety so severe it caused her to collapse? And why did this happen just 2 weeks after I told her I couldn't send money for a few months? I pushed those thoughts aside and went to see her. She looked small and vulnerable in the hospital bed, an IV in her arm and monitors beeping softly around her. When she saw me, her eyes filled with tears and she reached out her hand. I took it, sitting in the chair beside her bed. She told me she had been so scared that she thought she was dying, that she didn't want to die alone and forgotten. I assured her she wasn't alone or forgotten, that we were all there for her. Over the next few hours, the story came out in pieces. She had been having financial trouble, more serious than she had let on. She was behind on her mortgage payments. Her car was about to be repossessed. She had credit card debt that had ballooned to unmanageable levels. She had been too proud to tell anyone, too ashamed to ask for help after lecturing me for years about fiscal responsibility. The stress had been building, and when she couldn't afford groceries that week, something inside her had just snapped. Tyler looked shocked. Jason looked skeptical but concerned. I felt the familiar pull of guilt and obligation, the deeply ingrained instinct to fix everything and take care of everyone. David's voice echoed in my head, warning me about falling back into old patterns. But this was different, wasn't it? This was a genuine crisis, not manufactured drama. My mother was in the hospital, financially desperate, and clearly suffering. What kind of daughter would I be if I didn't help? The doctors kept her for 2 days, running additional tests and monitoring her condition. I went to visit each day after work, brought her magazines and the snacks she liked. Tyler and Jason came when they could around their own busy schedules. On the second day, once they had ruled out any serious medical issues and were preparing to discharge her, Mom asked if we could all talk together. The 4 of us gathered in her hospital room, an awkward family meeting in an uncomfortable setting. Mom, looking pale but determined, explained her financial situation in more detail. She was 3 months behind on her mortgage. She owed $12,000 in credit card debt. Her car payment was past due. She needed help, and she needed it soon, or she was going to lose everything. Tyler spoke first, explaining that he and Amanda were stretched thin with their own mortgage and the expenses of raising Sophia. He could maybe help with a few $100s, but nothing substantial. Jason said his student loans from medical school were crippling, and he and Priya were trying to save for a house. He could contribute a little, but not enough to make a real difference. They both looked at me. I felt the weight of their expectations, the familiar pressure to be the solution to everyone's problems. I thought about the $3,000 sitting in our emergency fund, money earmarked for fertility tests. I thought about how David would react if I even suggested using it for this. I thought about all the times I had given and given and given, and where it had gotten me. I thought about the baby I wanted to have, about breaking the cycle of dysfunction, about teaching my future child to have healthy boundaries. I told them I couldn't help financially. My voice was steady even though my hands were shaking. I explained that David and I were dealing with our own significant expenses related to fertility treatments. I suggested that Mom look into consumer credit counseling, possibly bankruptcy, if things were truly that dire. I offered to help her research options and fill out paperwork, but I could not give her money. Mom's face crumpled. Tyler looked disappointed but not surprised. Jason nodded slowly, like he understood even if he didn't agree. Mom said she had hoped her children would be there for her, the way she had always been there for us. I almost laughed at that statement. When had she been there for me? When had she put my needs first or supported my dreams? But I didn't say that. I just squeezed her hand and told her I loved her, but that I had to take care of my own family now. I left the hospital feeling like the worst person in the world and also strangely liberated. I had said no to a genuine crisis. I had chosen my own needs over my mother's demands. It felt both terrible and necessary, like ripping off a bandage or setting a broken bone. It hurt, but it was ultimately the right thing for my long-term health. David was proud of me when I told him what had happened. He held me while I cried, then helped me research credit counseling services for Mom. We found a reputable nonprofit that specialized in debt management and sent her the information. What she chose to do with it was up to her. Mom went home from the hospital, according to Tyler, immediately applied for the credit counseling program. They helped her negotiate with creditors, set up a payment plan, and create a realistic budget. She got a part-time job at a local retail store to supplement her real estate commissions. She had to make changes. Real changes. In her lifestyle and spending habits. It was hard for her, but she managed it because she had no choice. I resumed my fertility testing. The results showed that both David and I were healthy with no obvious fertility issues. The doctor recommended we try a few more months naturally before considering interventions. We were relieved and hopeful. I focused on my health, reducing stress, taking prenatal vitamins. I focused on my marriage, making sure David and I stayed connected and strong. I focused on my career, earning another promotion that came with a substantial raise. 3 months after Mom's collapse, I found out I was pregnant. I was at work when I took the test in the office bathroom, unable to wait until I got home. I stared at those 2 pink lines in disbelief and joy. I called David immediately, and we both cried on the phone. I had never felt so happy or so grateful. I waited a full month before telling anyone else. I wanted to protect this joy, to let it grow inside me without the complication of family drama. When I finally told my coworkers, they were thrilled. When I told David's family, they were overjoyed. When I told my brothers, they were genuinely happy for me. When I finally told Mom at 4 months, when I was clearly showing and couldn't hide it anymore, her reaction was complicated. She cried and said she was happy for me. She asked about the due date, the gender, whether I had chosen names yet, but there was something else in her expression. Something that looked almost like resentment. She asked if I had thought about how I would afford a baby, given how expensive children were. She asked if I remembered how hard it had been for her raising 3 kids after Dad died. She asked, in a tone that was trying to sound casual but came across as bitter, whether David's salary was enough to support a family since I would probably have to quit my job. I told her gently but firmly that David and I were financially stable, that I would be taking maternity leave but returning to my job, that we had planned carefully for this. I told her we were excited and that I hoped she could be excited for us too. She said of course she was excited. She was going to be a grandmother again. But the moment felt hollow, performative in the same way. So many moments with her had felt over the years. I limited her involvement in my pregnancy. I didn't tell her about doctor's appointments or invite her to go shopping for baby items. I created boundaries around this precious time, protecting it from her tendency to make everything about her own experiences, her own struggles, her own needs. David's mother became my surrogate mother figure during those months, attending appointments with me, helping me prepare the nursery, offering wisdom without judgment. It was healing in ways I hadn't expected, showing me what maternal love could look like when it wasn't conditional or transactional. My daughter was born on a clear October morning after 18 hours of labor. Grace Eleanor Carter. 7 pounds, 3 ounces of absolute perfection. When they placed her in my arms, I experienced a love so fierce and pure, it took my breath away. I looked at David, exhausted and emotional, and we both cried happy tears. This was our family. This was our future. This was everything we had worked for and sacrificed for and protected. Mom visited the hospital the day after Grace was born. She held her granddaughter with tears streaming down her face and told me how beautiful she was. She stayed for 30 minutes, took a few photos, then left saying she didn't want to overstay her welcome. It was the most respectful and appropriate she had been with me in years. I appreciated it, even if I didn't fully trust it. The first year of Grace's life was challenging but wonderful. Sleep deprivation, constant feedings, the overwhelming responsibility of keeping a tiny human alive. David and I learned together, made mistakes together, celebrated milestones together. I went back to work after 3 months of maternity leave, and we hired a wonderful nanny named Rosa who treated Grace like her own grandchild. My career continued to progress. David got another promotion. We were building the life we had dreamed of. Mom and I settled into a new kind of relationship, cordial but distant. I saw her every few months, always in public places or brief visits at our home. She would hold Grace, comment on how much she had grown, then make excuses to leave relatively quickly. She never asked to babysit alone, which I was grateful for. She never criticized my parenting choices, which I was suspicious of. It felt like she had finally accepted that her role in my life had changed, that I was no longer hers to control or manipulate. When Grace was 18 months old, David and I decided to try for a second child. The process was easier this time, less stressful and more natural. I got pregnant within 3 months. We were thrilled to give Grace a sibling, to expand our family in the way we had always planned. My second pregnancy was harder physically but easier emotionally, knowing what to expect and feeling more confident in myself as a mother. My son was born 2 weeks before his due date, a surprise that sent us scrambling but ultimately healthy and perfect. James David Carter. 8 pounds even. Grace was fascinated by her new brother, wanted to help with everything, already showing signs of the caring nature I hoped to nurture in her. Our family felt complete. Mom's reaction to James's birth was even more muted than her reaction to Grace. She visited once in the hospital, held him for maybe 10 minutes, then left. Tyler and Jason both visited longer, seemed genuinely interested in their nephew, brought thoughtful gifts. The difference in engagement was striking, and I found I didn't care as much as I thought I would. I had David. I had my children. I had built-in family. Mom's approval or involvement wasn't necessary for my happiness anymore. The next year passed in a blur of toddler tantrums and newborn cuddles, work deadlines, and family dinners. I got another promotion at work, this time to director of marketing with a team of 15 people and a salary that would have seemed impossible to my younger self. David became a regional manager for his company. We were successful, stable, happy. We had earned it through hard work and mutual support and a commitment to building something healthy and strong. I reduced contact with Mom even further. I would text her photos of the kids occasionally, call on her birthday and major holidays. She rarely reached out first, and when she did, it was brief and surface level. Tyler mentioned that she had started dating someone, a widower from her church named Frank, who seemed nice enough. I was glad for her. I hoped that maybe she could find happiness that didn't depend on manipulating her children. Then, on a Tuesday morning 2 months ago, I was getting Grace ready for preschool when my phone buzzed with a text message. I glanced at it while helping Grace put on her shoes, then looked again, certain I had misread it. Mom had sent a photo of herself at a travel agency, grinning widely, holding up cruise tickets. The message read, "Thank you for raising such a generous daughter." Me. You always said family comes first, and I finally saved enough to treat myself to this dream vacation. I worked so hard for this. I stared at that message while Grace tugged on my sleeve asking why I looked funny. The cruise tickets in the photo were clearly visible. Caribbean cruise. 12 days. Luxury accommodations. I knew from David's coworker who had taken a similar cruise that they cost somewhere between $10,000 and $15,000. I thought about the $200 a month I had finally stopped sending about 6 months ago after James was born, claiming I needed it for the kids' expenses. I thought about all the times Mom had claimed poverty, had manufactured crises, had made me feel guilty for having anything of my own. I thought about the hospital collapse, the financial desperation, the credit counseling she had supposedly been working with. I opened my banking app with shaking hands. $73 in my checking account until payday in 2 days. We had transferred most of our money to savings to rebuild our emergency fund after James's birth and some unexpected home repairs. We were fine, comfortable even, but I had exactly $73 of liquid cash at that moment. I had been meal planning carefully to stretch groceries. I had been putting off getting my car's transmission fixed because the quote was $800 and I wanted to save up for it rather than putting it on a credit card. And my mother had just spent more on a vacation than I made in 2 months of working full-time. David found me standing in the kitchen, frozen, staring at my phone. Grace had wandered off to play with her toys. James was asleep in his bouncer. David looked at my face and immediately knew something was wrong. He took the phone from my hand and read the message. I watched his expression shift from confusion to understanding to anger. He asked me how I felt. I realized I felt nothing. No anger. No hurt. No guilt. Just a vast emptiness where those feelings used to live. I had given so much of myself to her over the years. Had sacrificed my dreams and my money and my energy. Had let myself be used and manipulated and guilted, and she had taken it all without a second thought. Without genuine appreciation or recognition. She had learned nothing. She had changed nothing. She had simply found other sources when I stopped being available. Or maybe she had had the money all along and had just preferred to spend mine instead of hers. I didn't respond to the text. I didn't call her. I didn't confront her. I simply deleted the message and blocked her number. Not in anger or spite, but in a calm recognition that there was nothing left to say. She had shown me who she was countless times over the years. I had finally learned to believe her. I went about my day as if nothing had happened. I took Grace to preschool, sang along to her favorite songs in the car. I went to work and had a productive meeting about a new marketing campaign. I picked Grace up, took both kids to the park, pushed them on the swings while they giggled. I made dinner, gave them baths, read bedtime stories. I lived my life, the life I had fought so hard to build and protect. That night, lying in bed next to David, I thought about the journey that had brought me here. From the eager to please teenager working multiple jobs to fund her mother's lifestyle to the woman I was now, confident in her worth and clear about her boundaries. It hadn't been a straight path or an easy one. There had been backsliding and doubt and moments of weakness. But I had persisted. I had chosen myself, over and over again. Even when it felt selfish or wrong. I thought about my children sleeping soundly in their rooms, safe and loved and secure. I thought about the life I was modeling for them, showing them through actions that their worth was inherent, not conditional, showing them that love should lift you up, not tear you down, showing them that family was about mutual respect and care, not obligation and sacrifice. I was breaking the cycle, giving them something I never had the freedom to be themselves without guilt or manipulation. The next morning, Tyler called. Mom had apparently told him about my reaction to her cruise news. Or rather, my lack of reaction. He wanted to know if I was okay, if something had happened between us. I told him honestly that nothing new had happened, that Mom and I simply had different definitions of family and relationship, and I had made peace with maintaining distance. He seemed relieved that there wasn't fresh drama to deal with. He mentioned that Mom's boyfriend Frank had actually paid for half the cruise, that they were getting serious. I felt nothing hearing that information. Good for her. I thought, good for them. Jason sent an email a few days later. He had apparently done some reflecting, talked to his therapist about family dynamics and his role in them. He apologized again, more thoroughly this time, for not seeing how much I had carried alone for so many years. He acknowledged that he and Tyler had benefited from my sacrifice, had built their lives on the foundation of my deferred dreams. He didn't ask me to forgive Mom or reconnect with her. He just wanted me to know that he saw the truth now, that he was working on being better, and that he hoped I was happy. I wrote back thanking him for his honesty. I told him I was happy, that I had built a good life, that I held no resentment toward him or Tyler. They had been young and self-absorbed, which was normal for young adults. Mom was the adult who should have known better, should have protected all her children equally instead of using one to support the others. I told him I hoped he found peace with his own journey, and I meant it. The months passed. Mom went on her cruise, posted photos on social media of tropical sunsets and fancy dinners. I didn't look at them. I focused on my own life, my own family, my own goals. I got another promotion at work, this time to Vice President of Marketing. David and I celebrated with a nice dinner out, our first real date night in months. We talked about our dreams for the future, about maybe buying a bigger house, about taking the kids to Disney World when they were old enough to remember it. We were building something beautiful and strong and healthy. Grace started showing interest in piano, so we got our lessons. James was walking now, getting into everything, keeping us on our toes. Life was full and busy and sometimes exhausting but fundamentally good. I had learned to be present in my own life instead of always being pulled toward someone else's drama. I had learned that I deserved rest and joy and peace. I had learned that my worth wasn't measured by what I could provide to others, but by who I was as a person. Looking back now at that scared, exhausted 16-year-old girl handing over her first paycheck, I feel such compassion for her. She was doing the best she could with the information and tools she had. She believed love meant sacrifice, and that family meant obligation. She had been taught that her value lay in her utility, in her willingness to give endlessly without receiving. She had no model for healthy relationships or appropriate boundaries. She was doing what she thought was right. What she had been conditioned to believe was her role. But that girl grew up, She learned hard lessons through painful experiences. She found people who valued her for who she was, not what she could provide. She built a life based on mutual respect and genuine love rather than guilt and manipulation. She broke the cycle. I don't know if my relationship with Mom will ever be repaired. Honestly, I'm not sure I want it to be. The version of a relationship she offers is toxic to me, harmful to my well-being and my family. I've made peace with having a mother who exists primarily in name, who I maintain cordial distance from, but don't invest emotional energy in. It's not the mother-daughter relationship I dreamed of as a child, but it's the healthy boundary I need as an adult. My children will know their grandmother in a limited, supervised way. They will know that I came from somewhere, that they have extended family beyond David's relatives. But they will never be put in a position where they feel responsible for her happiness or her finances. They will never learn the lessons I learned about sacrificing themselves for others' comfort. They will be taught that love is about respect and care, not about obligation and guilt. Sometimes I still feel the pull of old patterns, the ingrained instinct to fix and give and sacrifice, but I have David to remind me of my worth. I have Dr. Chen, who still checks in on me occasionally and reminds me how far I've come. I have my therapist, who helped me understand that healing isn't linear and that setbacks don't erase progress. I have my children, who deserve a mother who models self-respect and healthy boundaries. I think about my father sometimes. I wonder what he would think of the woman I've become. Would he be proud that I stood up for myself? Would he be disappointed that I distanced myself from Mom? Would he understand that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is walk away? I like to think he would see me, really see me, the way he did when I was young. I like to think he would recognize that I'm finally living for myself, that I'm finally free. The journey from victim to survivor, to someone who thrives, hasn't been easy or straightforward. There have been moments of doubt, times when I wondered if I was being too harsh or too selfish. There have been family members who didn't understand, who thought I should be more forgiving or more patient. There have been cultural messages telling me that family is everything, that mothers deserve unconditional love and support, that cutting off family makes you a bad person. But I've learned that none of those messages account for abuse and manipulation and toxic dynamics. I've learned that you can love someone from a distance. I've learned that sometimes the most compassionate thing you can do for yourself and for your children is to say enough, to draw a line, to protect your peace. I've learned that I am worth protecting. If you made it to the end of this story, thank you for listening. If you've experienced something similar, I know that you're not alone and that change is possible. It takes courage to break free from toxic patterns, especially when they involve family. But you are worth that courage. You are worth the effort it takes to build a life that honors who you are, not just what others need you to be. What's your story? Have you had to set boundaries with family members who didn't respect you? How did you find the strength to choose yourself? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. And if this story resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe for more real stories about finding strength in the hardest moments. Your engagement helps these stories reach others who need to hear them. Until next time, remember that you deserve to be valued, respected, and loved for exactly who you are.